I have $4.12 in my checking account. That is not a metaphor. That is not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. That is the literal digital reality blinking back at me from my cracked phone screen. My landlord, a man who smells exclusively of damp wool and cigarettes, slid the eviction notice under my door 3 days ago. It's pink. A cheerful, bubblegum pink slip of paper that says, essentially, get out. Desperation makes you stupid. It makes you blind. It makes you ignore the glaring red flags waving in your face because they are obscured by the dazzling promise of a wire transfer. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm typing this on a contraband phone I managed to tape to the inside of my thigh before the intake search. I need to get this down while my head is still clear, while the hum of the ventilation is just a noise and not a voice. I found the ad on a day board that usually lists day labor and sketchy modeling gigs. It stuck out because it didn't have any typos. The Somnium Institute, Phase 4 Sleep Study. Compensation $10,000. Duration 14 days. Requirements perfect health. No family history of psychosis. Total isolation. 10 grand. 2 weeks. That's $5,000 a week. That pays my back rent, that pays my future rent, that buys me food that doesn't come in a styrofoam cup. I applied instantly. They called me 12 minutes later. The facility is located 40 miles outside the city, nestled in a valley where the GPS signal goes to die. I had to take 2 buses and walk the last 3 miles. The building doesn't look like a hospital. It looks like a brutalist monument to silence. It's a massive slab of gray concrete, windowless and imposing, surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. There were no cars in the parking lot, just a single black armored van near the loading dock. I almost turned around. The silence out there was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. But then I touched the eviction notice in my pocket. I kept walking. The lobby was an assault of white. White floors, white walls, white ceiling. The air smelled of nothing. Not clean, not dirty, just absent. It was cold enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. The receptionist didn't look up when I entered. She was typing on a keyboard that made no sound. "Name?" she asked. Her voice was flat, monotone. Elias Vance." "You're late, Mr. Vance." "The bus." "Sign these, all of them. Initial the bottom right of every page. Do not skip any." She slid a stack of paper across the marble counter. It was thick, at least 50 pages. The font was tiny, dense legalese. I sat in a rigid plastic chair and pretended to read. Most of it was standard: non-disclosure agreement, liability waiver, consent to blood draws. But then, around page 20, the language got weird. Clause 14, Section C. The participant acknowledges that prolonged exposure to the Somnium Protocol may result in temporal distortion, auditory hallucinations, and temporary dissociation. Clause 19, Section A. The Institute is not liable for any psychological trauma resulting from the bridging phase. Clause 22. In the event of catastrophic biological failure, the participants' remains become the sole propriety of the Somnium Institute for further study. Biological failure? I looked up at the receptionist. She was staring at me, unblinking, waiting. I thought about the $4.12. I thought about sleeping in my car in February. I signed it. I signed my life away for $10,000. "Excellent," a voice boomed. I jumped. Standing behind me was a man in a pristine lab coat. He was tall, gaunt, with skin the color of uncooked dough. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were dark, like sharks in deep water. "I am Dr. Eris. I am the lead researcher for this facility. You are making a significant contribution to science, Elias." "I'm just here for the check," I mumbled, handing the clipboard back. "Of course," Dr. Eris said. He gestured to a set of steel doors behind him. "Transparency is key, but once you cross this threshold, the study begins. Per the contract, you cannot leave until the 14 days are concluded. The data must not be corrupted by external variables. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. "Good. Follow me."
He swiped a keycard. The doors hissed open. We walked down a long corridor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a low, angry sound like a trapped insect. Zzz, zzz, zzz. "We are going down," Dr. Harris said, pressing the button for the elevator. "The isolation ward is on sub-level 4. Total soundproofing, vibration isolation. It is the perfect environment for sleep." The elevator ride was silent. I watched the numbers tick down. Lobby, B1, B2, B3, B4. My ears popped. The air pressure down here is different, thicker. When the doors opened, the smell hit me. It wasn't the sterile nothingness of the lobby. It smelled sharp, like ozone and bleach, and underneath that something metallic, like copper. "Room 404, Dr. Harris said, pointing to a glass-walled enclosure. It wasn't a room, it was a cell. A high-end, futuristic cell, but a cell nonetheless. There was a single bed, a toilet, a sink, and a desk bolted to the floor. The front wall was entirely glass, looking out into the central hallway. "Go on," he urged. I walked inside. I put my meager bag on the bed. "When do we start?" I asked, turning back to him. Dr. Harris was standing on the other side of the glass. He was still smiling that shark smile. He tapped the glass. It was thick, reinforced. "We have already started, Elias." He pressed a button on the wall outside. There was a mechanical clank from the ceiling, then a heavy thud as steel bolts drove into the floor. The glass door sealed shut. Air hissed as the seal pressurized. "Get comfortable." His voice came over a hidden intercom in my ceiling. It was crisp, digitized. "Nurse Ilara will be by shortly with your initial dosage. Do not try the door. It is magnetic. It will not open for 14 days. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the long white hall. I walked to the glass. I pushed on it. It was solid as a rock. I looked left. I saw another glass room. Another guy was in there, sitting on his bed, rocking back and forth. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, rimmed with red. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear him through the glass, but I'm pretty sure he said, "Run." I looked at my phone. No signal, of course. But I found a specific Wi-Fi network, SI guest restricted. No password. It connects to nothing but the internal server and, somehow, Reddit. Maybe the firewall is trash. Maybe they want me to write this. The lights just flickered. I think I hear a cart rolling down the hallway. The wheels are squeaking. I'm going to post this now. If anyone sees this, I'm at the Somnium Institute, sub-level 4. If I stop posting, don't come looking for me. Just call the police. The squeaking is getting closer.
The sound of a magnetic lock engaging is distinct. It's not a click, it's a thud, felt more in the chest than heard in the ears. It's the sound of a heavy book slamming shut on your fingers. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the glass wall. My reflection stared back. Tired eyes, 3-day stubble, a cheap flannel shirt that looked absurdly colorful against the aggressive sterility of room 404. I pressed my palm against the glass again. Cold, thick, maybe 2 inches of reinforced polycarbonate. I wasn't breaking that, not with a chair, not with my fists. "Standard procedure," I whispered to myself. My voice sounded flat in the small room. "Just a study. 2 weeks, 10 grand. I turned away from the glass to survey my new home. It was smaller than it looked from the outside, 12 by 12. The walls were padded with white acoustic foam arranged in geometric hexagons. It looked like the inside of a beehive designed by Apple. Everything was bolted down. The bed frame was welded to the floor. The desk was a molded extension of the wall. Even the toilet, stainless steel, prison style, was integrated seamlessly into the corner. There was no privacy curtain. I sat on the bed. The mattress was firm. The sheets were that impossible, blinding white that hurts your eyes under fluorescent light. I looked up. No vents. Just a sleek, perforated strip running along the ceiling edge where the air hissed in. It smelled recycled, stale oxygen and scrubbed carbon dioxide. I checked my phone again.
The signal bars were still dead, replaced by a small X. The Wi-Fi held, though. It was my only tether to the world above. Above. The thought hit me with a sudden physical weight. I was on sub-level 4. How deep was that? 50 feet? 100? I walked back to the glass wall. I needed to see out. I needed to expand my horizon beyond these 12 feet. The hallway was long and perfectly straight. Opposite me was another room, room 405. Inside was the man I'd seen earlier. He was pacing now. 5 steps forward, turn. 5 steps back. He was wearing gray scrubs, the same kind that were folded neatly at the foot of my bed. He stopped. He saw me watching him. He moved to the glass. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He pressed his forehead against the pane and just breathed. I could see the condensation fogging the glass in rhythm with his lungs. He looked exhausted, not just tired, but hollowed out. His eyes were bruised purples and yellows, sinking into a skull. How long had he been here? Zzz. The intercom in my ceiling crackled. "Attention, subject 404, the digitized voice said. It was polite, genderless, and utterly devoid of empathy. Please change into the provided attire. Your vitals will be monitored via the wristband located on your desk. Put it on immediately." I looked at the desk. There was a black rubber wristband with a small metallic face. No screen, just sensors. I stripped out of my clothes. It felt wrong to be naked in a glass box, even if the only audience was the pacing man across the hall and the unseen cameras I knew were hidden in the ceiling tiles. I pulled on the gray scrubs. They were loose, made of synthetic material that felt like paper. I snapped the wristband on my left arm. It beeped once. A tiny green light pulsed against my skin. I was part of the system now, a data point. Then the squeaking returned. I looked down the hall to my left. A cart was rounding the corner. It was pushed by a woman in a white nursing uniform, but it wasn't standard hospital gear. The fabric was stiff, high-collared. Her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled the skin of her forehead taut. She stopped in front of my glass wall. She smiled. It was a practiced expression, engaging only the muscles around her mouth. Her eyes remained dead flat. She tapped a keypad on the wall outside. Hiss. Click. The glass door slid open, just enough for her to slip through. "Good evening, Elias," she said. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, as if she didn't want to disturb the air. "I am Nurse Ilara." "Hi," I said, backing up until my legs hit the bed frame. "Is this the part where I get superpowers?" She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. "This is the part where we calibrate your baseline," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a digital thermometer and a blood pressure cuff. "Arm?" I held out my arm. Her fingers were ice cold, dry and papery. "BP is 140/90, she noted, glancing at the cuff's screen. "Elevated." "I'm a little anxious. Locked doors tend to do that." "The doors are for your safety," she said, peeling the Velcro off. "Sleep deprivation can lead to, well, unpredictability. We need to ensure you remain within the controlled environment." "Sleep deprivation?" I asked. "I thought this was just a study, monitoring REM cycles or whatever." She paused. For a second, her mask of professional indifference slipped. A flicker of something else crossed her face. Pity? "The Somnium protocol is designed to test the limits of the human wakeful state. You are not here to sleep, Elias. You are here to see how long you can remain awake." My stomach dropped. Wait, the ad said sleep study. It didn't say, "It is a study of sleep, specifically the absence of it. But do not worry, we have a pharmaceutical aid to help you." She turned to her cart. On a stainless steel tray sat a row of small amber vials and a syringe. "Aid?" I asked. "You mean stimulants?" "We call it the Lucid," she said. She picked up the syringe. It inhibits the buildup of adenosine in the brain. It scrubs the fatigue toxins. You will not feel tired. You will feel clear. I don't know if I want that, I said. I took a step toward the open door. Nurse Alara moved faster than I expected. She didn't grab me. She just stepped in my path, blocking the exit with her body. She was small, but her presence was heavy. "You signed the contract, Elias," she said gently. "Clause 8. Refusal of the initial dosage constitutes a breach of contract. You would forfeit the compensation and be liable for administrative costs totaling $15,000. I froze. 15 grand. I didn't have 15 cents. I looked at the syringe in her hand. The liquid inside was clear, but it seemed to catch the light in a strange way. It looked viscous, heavy. "Just a prick," she whispered. I looked at the man across the hall. He was pressed against the glass again. He was shaking his head, slowly, back and forth. "Don't do it." But I had no choice. The debt was a bigger monster than the needle. "Fine," I said. I sat on the edge of the bed. "Do it." She approached. She swabbed the crook of my elbow with an alcohol wipe. The smell was stinging, sharp. "Relax your fist," she whispered. I felt the needle slide in. Cold fire shot up my vein. It hit my heart in seconds, a rush of ice water adrenaline that made my vision snap into high-definition clarity. "There," she said, withdrawing the needle. "Welcome to the Somnium Institute." She backed out of the room. The glass door slid shut. The bolts slammed home. Thud. I stood up. I felt incredible. I felt like I could run a marathon. I felt like I could see the individual atoms in the air. I looked across the hall. The man in room 405 was gone. The lights in his room had been extinguished. And for the first time, I noticed that there were no switches in my room. I couldn't turn off the lights. I was wide awake, and I was trapped in a box of perpetual buzzing white.
The energy that Nurse Alara promised didn't last. Or rather, it mutated. At first, the Lucid felt like a supercharger strapped to my nervous system. I paced the 12-foot length of my cell for what felt like hours. My thoughts were racing at a velocity I couldn't control. I calculated my debts. I mentally reorganized my closet. I composed a symphony in my head despite not knowing how to read music. But then, the crash came. It wasn't a slow drift into drowsiness. It was a physical assault. It started with the lights. The aggressive, humming fluorescent strips overhead seemed to stretch. The light didn't just illuminate the room, it became a substance, a thick, milky fog that poured down from the ceiling, filling the space between the hexagon-padded walls. My legs gave out, not from weakness, but from a sudden, crushing weight. Gravity had doubled. I slumped onto the bed. The mattress, previously firm, felt like quicksand. I tried to sit up, to fight it, but my motor functions were severing one by one. Clause 14, Section C. Temporal distortion. The intercom crackled. It wasn't the digital voice this time. It was Dr. Eris. Subject 404. Vital signs are stabilizing. Initiating Phase 1, the bridge. "Wait," I tried to say. My tongue felt like a slab of dead meat in my mouth. "You said keeps me awake." "The lucid must bind to the subconscious. To keep you awake, Elias, we must first see what you are running from." My eyes slammed shut, but the darkness didn't come. That's the thing about sleep. You expect a fade to black, a void, a pause button on existence. This wasn't sleep. This was being dragged through a hole in the floor of reality. I was standing in the hallway of the Somnium Institute, but it wasn't the sterile white hallway I had walked down an hour ago. It was rusted. The walls were peeling, revealing wet red brick underneath. The fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by a single swinging bulb at the far end of the corridor that cast long, sickly shadows. I looked down at my body. I wasn't wearing the gray scrubs. I was naked.
vulnerable. "Hello?" I called out. My voice didn't echo. The sound was swallowed by the damp walls. Scritch, scritch, scritch. A sound from behind me, like nails on chalkboard, like bone dragging on concrete. I turned around. Room 405, the room opposite mine, was open. The glass wall was shattered, shards of polycarbonate scattered across the floor like diamonds. I walked toward it. I knew I shouldn't. In a dream, you always know you shouldn't open the door, but your feet move anyway. You are a passenger in your own body. I stepped over the broken glass. The room was empty. The bed was overturned. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouging marks that went through the padding and into the steel behind it. They were frantic, desperate, and written on the back wall in a substance that looked too dark to be paint were words. "They are hungry." The temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the air. Something moved in the corner of my eye. I spun around. Standing in the doorway was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its limbs were elongated, stretched like taffy. It wore a tattered lab coat that hung off its skeletal frame. But it had no face. Where a face should be, there was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a blank canvas of flesh. It raised a hand. The fingers were too long, too many joints. It pointed at me. And then a slit opened in the blank face, a vertical slit, tearing the skin apart. A sound came out. It wasn't a scream, it was static. Loud white noise that drilled into my skull, vibrating my teeth, liquefying my brain. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound was inside me. The figure stepped closer. The static got louder. It leaned down, its faceless head inches from mine. I felt its breath. It smelled of ozone and copper, the same smell as the elevator. It whispered, cutting through the static. "Not yet." Gasp! I sat up, inhaling so hard my ribs cracked. I was back in room 404, the white walls, the humming lights, the glass door. I was drenched in sweat. The paper scrubs were clinging to my skin, translucent with moisture. My heart was hammering against my chest like a trapped bird. Thump, 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 thump. I scrambled backward, pushing myself into the corner of the bed, my back against the cold padding. I looked at the glass wall. Dr. Eris was there. He was standing outside, clipboard in hand, looking at a monitor mounted on the wall. He looked up and met my eyes. He nodded once, a clinical, satisfied nod. I looked across the hall. Room 405. The glass was intact. The lights were back on. The man in the gray scrubs, patient 4, was standing in the center of his room. He was staring right at me. He wasn't pacing anymore. He was perfectly still. He raised a hand and pointed at me, just like the thing in the dream. Then he slowly drew a finger across his throat. I looked down at my wristband. The green light was flashing rapidly. Zzz. "Subject 404, Dr. Eris returned, crisp and clear. "Welcome back. You were under for exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes? It felt like hours. It felt like a lifetime. The initial bonding phase is complete. The Lucid is now active. You will not sleep again, Elias. Not for the next 14 days. I touched my face. My skin felt numb. "What was that?" I yelled at the ceiling. "What the hell did you give me?" "A glimpse. Just a glimpse. Try to relax. Lunch will be served in the common area in 3 hours. Until then, try not to blink." The intercom clicked off. I looked at the walls. They were steady now, but I couldn't shake the feeling of the cold breath on my face, the smell of copper. I looked down at my arm where the needle had gone in. There was a small bruise forming. It was dark, almost black, and it was shaped perfectly like a fingerprint. I'm not tired anymore. I'm wide awake, but I can still hear the static in the back of my mind. and I know with absolute certainty that if I close my eyes again, that thing with the blank face will be waiting for me.
Time doesn't exist in sub-level 4. There are no windows. The fluorescent lights never flicker, never dim, never turn off. They just hum, a constant, aggressive vibration that I can feel in my teeth. According to the clock on my phone, it has been 72 hours since I signed the contract. 3 days. I haven't slept for a single second of it. That's the Lucid working. Nurse Alara was right about the biology of it. I don't feel tired. I don't feel the heavy eyelids or the mental fog or the desperate need to crash. My body is flooded with artificial energy. But she didn't tell me about the stretching. Without sleep to break up the day, the hours elongate. A minute feels like an hour feels like a week. I have spent the last 3 days pacing my 12-foot cell, counting the hexagon pads on the wall, there are exactly 412, and waiting for the food slot to open. I feel like a wire pulled so tight it's starting to fray. Earlier today, or maybe yesterday, I can't tell, the intercom chimed. "Attention subjects," the digital voice announced. "Commencing socialization period. Doors will unlock for 60 minutes. Proceed to the central atrium. Interaction is mandatory." Mandatory fun. The heavy bolts in the floor retracted. Clank. My glass door slid open. I stepped out into the hallway. The air was colder here. I wasn't alone. Other doors were opening. I saw people stepping out of their glass cages like timid animals released into a zoo enclosure. There were 6 of us in this wing. We walked toward the end of the hall where a large set of double doors led to the atrium. The atrium was just a larger white room. There were a few bolted-down tables and chairs, a water cooler, and a shelf with a few board games that looked like they were from the 1990s. I grabbed a cup of water. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the raw, buzzing energy coursing through my veins. "Hey." I turned. It was the man from room 405, the one I'd seen across the hall, the one who had drawn his finger across his throat. Up close, he looked worse. His name tag said, Subject 405, Marcus. He was young, maybe mid-20s, but his face was gray. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and darting around the room as if tracking flies that weren't there. His skin looked waxy, like it was shrinking against his skull. "You're the new guy," Marcus said. His voice was a dry croak. He scratched at his arm, digging his fingernails in deep. "I'm Elias. You signaled me, in the room." Marcus looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He leaned in close. He smelled of sour sweat and antiseptic. "You took the shot, didn't you?" "The Lucid? Yeah, they said they had to." Marcus laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. "We all took it. It keeps the lights on upstairs. But it opens the door, man. It opens the door." "What door?" I asked. "What are you talking about?" He grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. His fingers were hot. "How long have you been awake?" he demanded. 3 days, I think. "I've been here 7, Marcus whispered. I pulled my arm back. 7 days? The study is only supposed to be 2 weeks. You're halfway done." Marcus shook his head violently. No, listen. The doctors, they came in yesterday. They did a check. They told me I slept for 8 hours. They showed me the logs. They showed me the charts." He looked around again, terrified. "But I didn't sleep, Elias. I haven't closed my eyes in a week. I sat on my bed and watched them. I watched them update the logs. I watched them type in subject sleeping while I was staring right at them." "Why would they lie?" I asked. "Because of the side effects," a woman said. I turned. Another participant had joined us. She was older, wearing the same paper scrubs. Her name tag read Subject 402, Sarah. She looked calm, but her pupils were dilated so wide her eyes looked entirely black. "If we don't sleep, the brain starts to degrade. Hallucinations, paranoia, psychosis. If they admit we aren't sleeping, they have to shut the study down. Ethical violation." "So they fake the data?"
Marcus spat. "They tell us we slept so we don't panic, but we know. We know." He was twitching now, a rhythmic spasm in his left shoulder. "I see them, in the corners. When you look straight at them, they're gone, but in your peripheral, they're waiting." "The shadow people?" I asked, remembering the dream, the figure with the blank face. Marcus went pale. "You've seen them too?" he asked. "In a dream, during the first dose." "That wasn't a dream," Marcus said. He was trembling. "That was the waiting room, and now you're out here, and they're getting closer." Suddenly, the double doors to the atrium hissed open. Dr. Eris walked in. He was flanked by 2 security guards. They weren't wearing normal security uniforms. They were wearing full tactical gear, black from head to toe. And they were wearing masks. Why would they need masks? The air was sterile. "Socialization period is concluded," Eris announced. He was smiling that shark smile. "Please return to your quarters for evening vitals." Marcus didn't move. He was staring at the guards, specifically at their masks. "Why are you wearing those?" Marcus screamed. His voice cracked. "What are you pumping in here?" "Return to your rooms, Subject 405, Eris said calmly. "No!" Marcus backed away, knocking over a chair. It clattered loudly on the hard floor. "I know what you're doing. I know about the bridge. I won't let you take me back there." One of the guards stepped forward. He pulled a baton from his belt. It crackled with electricity. "Marcus," Sarah hissed. "Don't!" "They're not human," Marcus yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Dr. Eris. "Look at him. Look at his eyes. He never blinks. He never blinks." I looked at Dr. Eris. Marcus was right. In the minute Eris had been standing there, his eyelids hadn't moved once. His eyes were wide, wet, and fixated on Marcus with predatory intensity. "Sedate him," Eris said. His tone was bored. The guards moved. It was a blur of motion. Marcus tried to run, but he was weak, uncoordinated. One guard swept his legs. Marcus hit the floor hard. Zap! The stun baton hit his ribs. He convulsed, arching his back, a guttural sound tearing from his throat. "Take him to the infirmary," Eris ordered. "He is experiencing an acute episode. He needs rest." "No!" Marcus shrieked as they dragged him up. He looked at me. His eyes were desperate. "Elias, don't let them take me. The infirmary is where they—" One of the guards clamped a gloved hand over Marcus's mouth. They dragged him out of the room, his heels screeching against the white floor. Eris adjusted his cuffs. He looked at me. He looked at Sarah. "Apologies for the disturbance," Eris said smoothly. "Sleep deprivation can make people irrational. Please go to your rooms." I walked back to room 404. My legs felt like lead. I entered my cell. The bolt slammed home. Thud. I went to the glass. I looked across the hall. Room 405 was empty. The bed was overturned. And on the glass wall of Marcus's room, from the inside, there was a smudge, a greasy, hand-shaped smear. But it wasn't Marcus's handprint. Marcus had smaller hands. This print was massive. The fingers were too long, elongated, distorted. I looked at Dr. Eris, who was still standing in the hallway, writing on his clipboard. He stopped writing. He slowly turned his head toward me. He tapped the glass of my room with the tip of his pen. He winked. I'm sitting on my bed now. I've been staring at that handprint on the glass opposite me for an hour. It's fading, like condensation, but the room is bone dry.
Night at the Somnium Institute is a lie. They don't turn off the lights, they just change the color temperature. At 2200 hours precisely, the harsh white fluorescent hum shifts to a sickly dim amber. It's supposed to mimic sunset. It looks more like the inside of a pill bottle. I am sitting on the floor, back against the glass, watching room 405. It's been 6 hours since the guards dragged Marcus away. 6 hours since he screamed about the eyes that don't blink. I haven't moved. The Lucid is still coursing through me. I checked my pulse on the wristband. 55 BPM. Calm. Steady.
but my mind is vibrating at a frequency that feels dangerous, like a glass about to shatter from a high pitch. Room 405 is empty. But it's not just empty. It's been erased. Around 0100 hours, a team came down the hall. Not the nurses, not Dr. Aris. It was a cleaning crew. 3 of them. They weren't wearing scrubs. They were wearing full-body hazmat suits, bright canary yellow rubber with thick black respirators. They entered Marcus's room. I watched them strip the bed. They didn't fold the sheets. They shoved them into a biohazard bag, a red bag. They wiped down the walls. They sprayed a foaming chemical on the floor that hissed when it touched the tiles. And the glass where that impossible elongated handprint had been. They spent 20 minutes scrubbing that specific spot. One of them used a scraping tool. I could hear the scritch, scritch, scritch vibration through the floor. It sounded like they were trying to scrape a stain off the very fabric of reality. When they were done, room 405 looked brand new, pristine, sterile, ready for the next desperate broke guy. They left without looking at me. They rolled their cart of red bags down the hall, the squeaking wheels echoing in the amber gloom. I stood up. I went to my desk. I tapped the screen of the health monitor they provided. It connects to the internal network. It shows my stats: heart rate, blood pressure, O2 saturation. But if you tap the top right corner 3 times, a trick I figured out when I was bored on day 2, it shows the unit status for the whole ward. I scrolled to Unit 405. I expected it to say vacant or discharged or removed for medical intervention. The text on the screen was green. Unit 405, Marcus, status, active, state, REM cycle 3, vitals, stable. I stared at the screen. I looked through the glass at the empty room. I looked back at the screen. "He's not there," I whispered. The screen lied. It said his heart rate was 62. It said his respiration was 14 breaths per minute. It was generating data for a ghost. If they are lying about him, they are lying about me. Am I sleeping right now? I pinched my arm hard. I dug my nails in until I broke the skin. A tiny bead of blood welled up. It hurt. It was sharp and real. I am awake. But the doubt, that's what they want. They want me to question my own eyes. I paced. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. I stopped at the glass wall again. The amber light was playing tricks on me. In the reflection of the glass, behind my own shoulder, I saw movement. I spun around. Nothing. Just the white padded walls, the bolted bed, the toilet. I turned back to the glass. Movement again. A shadow, tall, thin, standing in the corner of my room. I spun again. Nothing. "Show yourself," I yelled. My voice sounded ragged. Zzz. The intercom clicked. "Subject 404, the voice said. It wasn't the computer, it was Nurse Ilara. "Please lower your voice. You are disturbing the other subjects." "There are no other subjects," I shouted at the ceiling speaker. "Marcus is gone. You scrubbed his room. The screen says he's sleeping, but he's gone." "Subject 405 is resting comfortably in the infirmary annex," Ilara said. Her voice was soothing, sickeningly sweet. "The biomonitor tracks the implant, Elias, not the room. He is close by. He is fine." "Implant?" I froze. There was nothing in the contract about an implant. "The initial injection," Ilara said. "The Lucid carries a suspended micro tag for telemetry. It is standard. Relax, Elias. Your heart rate is elevating to 110. Do we need to intervene?" Intervene? I looked at the heavy steel door. I looked at the vents. "No," I said, backing away from the glass. "No intervention. I'm fine." "Good. Sleep is vital for recovery, Elias. But since you are on the protocol, perhaps you should read a book. Distract yourself.
The intercom clicked off. A micro tag inside me, floating in my blood, or maybe lodged in my brain. I looked at the bruise on my arm, the fingerprint bruise. I sat on the bed. I felt sick. Not tired sick, wrong sick. I looked across the hall at room 405 again. The lights in the hallway flickered, just for a microsecond, a glitch in the matrix. And in that split second of darkness, before the amber hum returned, I saw him, Marcus. He was standing in the center of his empty, scrubbed room, but he wasn't wearing scrubs. He was naked, and his skin was black. Not paint, it looked like charred wood, like he had been burned from the inside out. And he had no eyes, just smooth, sealed flesh where the sockets should be. The light buzzed back on. The room was empty. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. "It's a hallucination," I whispered. "Clause 14, temporal distortion, visual artifacts." But then I saw it. On the glass of room 405, from the inside. Fresh breath fog. Condensation, roughly at head height, fading slowly in the dry, recycled air. Someone was in there. Someone invisible, or someone vibrating at a frequency I couldn't quite see yet, and they were breathing against the glass, watching me. I grabbed my phone. I'm typing this under the blanket. The air in here is getting colder. I can see my own breath now. The isolation isn't keeping people out. It's keeping something in.
Day 4, or maybe 5. The distinction is meaningless. The only clock is the lighting system, and I don't trust it anymore. At some point, the amber night mode snapped off. The aggressive, sterile white returned instantly. No sunrise, no gradual dawn, just a sudden switch from dim to blinding. I was waiting for the doors to open. I was waiting for the socialization period. I needed to see Sarah. I needed to know if she saw the charred thing in Marcus's room. I needed to hear another human voice that wasn't filtered through a speaker. I stood by the glass, dressed in my wrinkled paper scrubs, watching the hallway. The hour came and went. The bolts in the floor didn't retract. The magnetic seal didn't hiss. The hallway remained empty. I pounded on the glass. The sound was dull, absorbed by the thickness of the polycarbonate. "Hey," I yelled, "let us out. It's time." Zzz. "Attention subjects," the intercom buzzed. It was the automated voice this time. "Socialization protocol has been suspended indefinitely. Containment level 2 is now in effect. Please remain in your quarters." Containment. That's a word you use for viruses, for radiation, for wild animals, not for sleep study participants. "Why?" I shouted at the ceiling. "What happened?" "Please remain calm," the voice droned. "Recent data suggests that interpersonal contact exacerbates the neurodivergence of the lucid state. Isolation is necessary for your safety. The side effects are temporary." Neurodivergence. Side effects. I looked across the hall to room 402, Sarah's room. She was standing at her glass wall. She looked frantic. She was pressing a piece of paper against the pane. I squinted. It was a page from the liability contract. She had used something dark to scrawl on it. Maybe food? Maybe something else. "They took 403. I froze. Subject 403. A guy named David. I hadn't met him, but I knew his room was 2 doors down from mine. I moved to the far edge of my glass wall, pressing my face against the cold surface to get an angle down the hallway. Room 403 was dark, but not empty. The door was open. The lights were out. But inside I could see shapes. The cleaning crew again. The yellow suits. But this time they weren't scrubbing. They were welding. I saw the spark of a torch, blue flashes illuminating the dark interior. They were welding a metal plate over the ventilation shaft in the ceiling of room 403. Why would they seal the vents? I looked back at Sarah.
She was pointing at the ceiling. Then she pointed at her ears. She heard something in the vents. Clank. A mechanical sound from my own wall made me jump. A small panel near the floor slid open. It was a dumbwaiter system. A metal tray slid out. Dinner. Or breakfast. Or whatever meal corresponded to this cycle of white light. I walked over and picked up the tray. It was light. There were no utensils, just a foil packet and a pouch of water. I tore open the packet. Inside was a gray, gelatinous block. It looked like wet cement. It smelled like yeast and vitamins. I poked it. It jiggled. Nutrient-dense caloric intake, I muttered, quoting the brochure I'd seen in the lobby a lifetime ago. I took a bite. It tasted like ash. I forced it down. I had to keep my strength up. The Lucid drug was burning through my metabolism. I could feel it. I was hungry all the time, a gnawing, hollow sensation in my gut that the gray block barely touched. As I ate, I sat by the glass, watching the yellow suits work in room 403. They finished welding, then they backed out. One of them stopped. He turned his helmeted head toward me. The black glass of his visor reflected the hallway lights. I couldn't see his face. He raised a gloved hand. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. A countdown? Or a count of how many of us were left? He turned and pushed his cart away. The hallway fell silent again. I went back to my bed. I tried to access Reddit on my phone. The connection was spotty. The SI guest restricted network was fluctuating. I managed to load a news page. Just regular world news. Politics, weather, celebrity gossip. It felt like reading a transmission from Mars. Then I heard it. It was faint at first. A scratching sound. Scritch. Scratch. It was coming from above. I looked up at the ceiling. The acoustic tiles were seamless. The perforated vent strip ran along the edge. Scritch. Scratch. It sounded like rats, big rats, moving through the ductwork. I stood on my bed. I reached up, my fingers brushing the ceiling. I couldn't reach the vent. "Hello?" I whispered. The scratching stopped. Then a voice. It wasn't coming from the intercom. It was coming through the ductwork. It was tinny, metallic, and terrified. "Help." I froze. "Where are you?" "I thought they took you." "In the walls." David trembled, echoing through the aluminum shaft. "I crawled up before they sealed it. Hiding." "Why are you hiding?" The doctors. They aren't doctors. I saw them without the masks. Elias, I saw them." "What did you see?" "No faces. Just skin, smooth skin, and teeth. So many teeth." My blood ran cold. The dream, the figure with the blank face. "David, listen to me. You have to get out of the vents. They're sealing them. I saw them welding." "Too late," David whimpered. "Something else is in here with me. It smells like copper." Silence. Then a sound that I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a scream. It was a wet, tearing sound, like a melon dropped on concrete. Squelch! Then a rapid, heavy thumping in the ductwork above my head. Thump, 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 like something heavy being dragged away at high speed. "David!" I yelled. I punched the ceiling tile. It didn't budge. The thumping faded into the distance. Then silence. The intercom clicked on immediately. "Subject 404, the intercom was Dr. Aris this time. "Please refrain from shouting. Auditory hallucinations are a common side effect of Phase 2. The sounds in the ventilation are merely the HVAC system settling." "I heard him," I screamed at the camera. "I heard David. He was in the vents." "Subject 403 has been discharged. He went home hours ago. You are confused, Elias. Eat your nutrient block. Focus on your breathing." "You're lying." "Elias." Aris's voice dropped an octave. It lost its professional veneer. It sounded hungry. "Do not make us come down there. You are doing so well. Don't spoil the data. The line cut. I sat on the bed, trembling. I looked at the gray block of food on the floor where I had dropped it. It had a footprint in it. I live alone in this room. The door hasn't opened. But there, pressed into the soft gray gelatin of my dinner, was a small, three-toed print, like a bird or a reptile. I looked under the bed. Nothing. I looked at the vent strip. A single drop of dark red liquid gathered on the rim of the metal. It hung there for a second, heavy and viscous. Drip. It hit the white floor. It wasn't condensation. It was blood.
The blood spot on the floor is dry now. It's a small rust-colored flake on the pristine white tile. I've been staring at it for hours, or maybe minutes. My internal clock is shattered. I tried to scrub it away with my sleeve, but it left a smear, a persistent, stubborn stain that proves I didn't imagine David screaming in the vents. It proves the wet thump I heard was real matter hitting real aluminum. But proving it to myself isn't the problem. The problem is that my brain is beginning to betray me. The Lucid is doing its job. I am not tired. My body is vibrating with a horrible chemical alertness. I could run a marathon. I could solve complex equations. But my processing center, the part of me that interprets the signals from my eyes and ears, is misfiring. It started with the dead pixels. That's the only way I can describe them, small black squares floating in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was dust on my cornea. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and raw, but the spots didn't move with my gaze. They stayed fixed in space, hovering in the air like burnt holes in a film reel. When I looked directly at them, they vanished, but now they're clumping together. I'm sitting on my bed, knees pulled to my chest. If I look at the corner of the room, the intersection of the white padded walls and the ceiling, I see it. A mass of static. It looks like television fuzz, black and white noise, roiling and churning in the corner. It's about the size of a person. It buzzes, a low electric frequency that I feel in my molars. Hums, hum. I turn my head to look at it straight on. Gone, just white padding. I turn my head back to the front. It returns, closer this time. Clause 14, Section C. Visual artifacts. The contract warned me. Dr. Aris warned me. Ignore the shadows, they said. But how do you ignore a shadow that breathes? That's the other thing. The room is breathing. I'm watching the hexagonal acoustic pads on the wall opposite me. They are expanding and contracting, slowly, rhythmically. Inhale, exhale. The seams between the pads stretch, revealing a dark, fleshy pink underneath, then close up again. The room is not a room. It is a lung. I am trapped inside a living organ. I stood up to touch the wall. My hand passed through the air, but the air felt thick, gelatinous, like moving through clear syrup. I touched the pad. It felt warm, moist. I recoiled, wiping my hand on my paper scrubs. "Get it together, Elias," I whispered. "It's the drug. It's the lack of REM sleep. Your brain is trying to dream while you're awake." I walked to the glass wall. I needed an anchor. I needed to see Sarah. I looked across the hallway into room 402. Sarah was there. She was sitting in the middle of her floor, facing away from me. "Sarah!" I shouted. I banged my fist on the glass. The sound was dull, muted by the thick atmosphere. She didn't turn. She was rocking back and forth. Her shoulders were shaking. Then I saw who she was talking to. There was someone else in room 402. Standing in the corner of her room, just at the edge of the light, was a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its head scraped the ceiling. It was made entirely of that black, vibrating static. It had no features, no clothes, just a silhouette cut out of the fabric of the world, filled with void. It was leaning over her, looming. Sarah suddenly threw her head back and screamed. I couldn't hear the scream through the glass, but I saw the cords in her neck strain. I saw her mouth open wide enough to unhinge her jaw. The static figure reached out a hand that trailed smoke like a burning wick.
It touched her shoulder. Sarah stopped screaming. She went rigid. Then she slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes were gone. Not gouged out, just erased. Where her eyes should have been, there was only smooth, unbroken skin, like a doll that hadn't been finished. She smiled. It was a wide, terrible smile that stretched too far across her face. I stumbled back from the glass, tripping over my own feet. I hit the floor hard. I scrambled backward until my back hit the bed frame. "No," I gasped. "No, no, no, that's not real. That's a hallucination. Sarah is fine. Sarah is fine." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Don't close your eyes," the warning from the dream flashed in my mind. I snapped them open. The static figure was in my room. It was standing by the desk. It wasn't looking at me. It had no face to look with, but I felt its attention. It felt like standing in front of an open blast furnace. The heat coming off it was intense. It raised a hand. It pointed a finger made of buzzing noise at the wall. I looked where it was pointing. The wall padding was shifting. The hexagons were rearranging themselves. They were forming letters, raised bumps in the white foam. DONOTSLEEP. I blinked. The figure was gone. The letters on the wall were gone. But the smell remained. Ozone and something else. Something ancient and rot sweet. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I jumped, nearly shrieking. I pulled it out. I had a notification. Not a text, not a signal. A local notification from the health monitor app the Institute had installed. New message from user, admin Eris. I opened it. The text was simple. "Enjoying the show, Elias? The visual cortex is fascinating when it breaks. Stop looking at the corners. Look at the truth." I looked up at the camera on the corner. The red light was steady, unblinking. I'm not hallucinating. Or if I am, they're controlling the hallucinations. They're feeding them to me. I checked the Wi-Fi. It's getting weaker. The signal strength is dropping. I need to find a way out of this room. The static is getting louder. The dead pixels are starting to cluster around the door frame now. They're blocking the exit. And I swear, I just heard scratching from under my bed. Not from the floor, from inside the mattress. Something is trying to chew its way out.
The scratching wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from inside the mattress. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the ravings of a man whose brain has been pickled in adrenaline and sleep deprivation for, what is it now, 5 days? 6? But I heard it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was the frantic, desperate sound of something trying to dig its way out. I stood over the bed. The white sheets were rumpled, stained with my sweat. The mattress was a standard hospital issue, blue, vinyl-covered, fire retardant. I didn't have a knife. I didn't have scissors. I used my teeth. I bit into the vinyl seam at the corner. It tasted like chemicals and plastic. I pulled, tearing the fabric. It was tough, but the Lucid gave me a jaw strength I shouldn't have possessed. The seam ripped with a loud pop. I jammed my fingers into the hole and pulled. The vinyl shrieked as I tore it open, revealing the yellow foam interior. "Come out," I hissed. "Come out, you little bastard." I plunged my hands into the foam. It was warm, uncomfortably warm. It felt like sticking my hands into the belly of a freshly killed animal. I tore chunks of foam out, throwing them onto the pristine white floor, yellow confetti. I dug until I hit the metal springs. I dug until the mattress was gutted, a hollowed-out carcass of bedding. There was nothing there. No rat, no speaker, no bug. The scratching stopped the moment I breached the core. I stood there, panting, my hands covered in yellow crumbs. I looked at the devastation I'd caused. "Subject 404, the intercom buzzed. It was the automated voice. "Destruction of Institute property is a violation of Code 6. The cost of the mattress, $450, will be deducted from your final stipend." "Deduct it!" I screamed at the ceiling. "Deduct it all!"
I kicked the metal bed frame. It clangorously vibrated against the bolts, anchoring it to the floor. And then I saw it. Because I had ripped the mattress apart and kicked the frame, the angle of the light from the hallway hit the underside of the bed differently. The steel platform, the flat surface the mattress rested on, wasn't smooth. It was textured. I dropped to my knees. I pressed my cheek against the cold floor tiles and shimmied under the bed frame. It was a tight squeeze. The steel pressed against my shoulder blades. The air down there was stale, smelling of dust and old fear. I looked up at the underside of the bed. It was covered in scratches, thousands of them, tiny, jagged marks etched into the painted steel. It looked like a prisoner counting days on a cell wall, but it wasn't Cali marks. It was writing. The letters were small, frantic, and crowded. They had been carved with something sharp, a zipper pull, a button, or maybe a fingernail, hardened and broken. I squinted, trying to read the text in the shadow cast by the frame. SUBJ 399, day 11. Subject 399, the person before me. I traced the grooves with my finger. I could feel the desperation in the depth of the cuts. The Lucid is a lie. It doesn't keep you awake. It keeps the door open. I shivered. The cold from the steel seeped into my spine. They live in the static. The bridge is their hunting ground. I moved my eyes further down. The writing got messier here, larger, more erratic, as if the writer was running out of time. Do not sleep. They come when you sleep. If you close your eyes, they drag you across. And then, right near the edge, carved so deep it had exposed the raw metal underneath. Fake the dosage. Stay awake on your own. If the Lucid is in your blood, they can see you. My heart stopped. If the Lucid is in your blood, they can see you. The drug, the aid they were pumping into us every morning, it wasn't just a stimulant, it was a beacon. It was a highlighter marker for the things living in the corners of the room. That's why Marcus saw them. That's why Sarah lost her eyes. The drug made us visible to them. But the warning, do not sleep, it was a paradox, a trap. If I sleep, the shadow people take me, like they took David in the vents. If I take the drug to stay awake, the drug lights me up like a flare and they find me anyway. I had to stay awake without the drug. I had to get the Lucid out of my system. I scrambled out from under the bed. I stood up, brushing the dust off my scrubs. I looked at the camera. Had they seen me reading it? The red light was steady. I grabbed the torn sheet and threw it over the exposed bed frame, hiding the message. I piled the chunks of foam back on top. I made it look like a nest, a crazy person's nest. Just nesting, I muttered to the camera, just making it comfortable. I needed a plan. Nurse Ilara would be coming soon. The morning cycle was approaching. The lights would shift from amber back to the blinding white. She would bring the cart. She would bring the syringe. Fake the dosage. How? She watches me. She injects it directly into my vein. I looked at the needle, the clear, viscous liquid, the beacon. I looked at the guards. I looked at the message hidden under the foam. They come when you sleep. I have to stay awake, but I have to do it on my own terms. I have to bridge the gap without their help. As she stepped forward, I clenched my fist. I'm going to try something stupid. If this works, I might have a chance. If it fails, I'm going to end up like Marcus. I'm posting this now because I don't know if I'll have my phone after this. The needle is touching my skin.
I didn't bite my tongue. That would have been too small, too easily ignored. I went for the eyes, not hers, mine. As Nurse Ilara stepped forward, syringe raised, I screamed. It was a primal, chest-tearing sound that had been building in my lungs for 5 days. I jammed my thumbs into my own eye sockets, pressing until sparks exploded in my vision, and threw myself backward onto the pile of yellow foam chunks. "Restrain him," Ilara barked. The 2 guards lunged. The one on the left grabbed my legs. The one on the right, the one with the stun baton, dove for my chest.
This was the moment, the only variable I could control. I thrashed, kicking the cart. The metal tray clambered against the wall. Vials rolled. The syringe was still in Ilara's hand, but she was off balance. "Hold him still!" she shrieked. The guard pinned my arms to the floor. My face was pressed into the shredded remains of the mattress. "Do it now," the guard grunted. Ilara jammed the needle down, but she missed the vein. In the chaos, in the forest of limbs and yellow foam, she stabbed the needle through the loose fabric of my paper scrub sleeve and straight into a chunk of sponge I had clutched in my armpit. She didn't notice. She slammed the plunger down. I felt the cold liquid saturate the foam against my skin, soaking my shirt. I let out one last gargling cry, convulsed my back into an arch, and then went limp. Dead weight. "Dose administered," Ilara huffed. She sounded out of breath. "Jesus, this one is degrading fast." "Should we sedate him?" the guard asked. His voice was muffled by the gas mask. "No," Ilara said. "The Lucid will stabilize him. Let him ride the high. If he's not calm in an hour, we incinerate the contract and move to Phase 3. Incinerate the contract. They stood over me for a moment. I focused on slowing my heart rate, breathing shallowly into the dust of the floor. "Let's go," Ilara said. "Subject 406 is arriving in 20 minutes. The door hissed. The bolts slammed home. Thud. I waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. I sat up. My shirt was soaked with the clear, viscous fluid. It smelled chemical, like burning plastic and ammonia. I ripped the shirt off and used a dry chunk of foam to wipe the liquid off my skin before it could absorb. I threw the wet foam into the corner, as far away from me as possible. Then the crash hit. It wasn't the chemical crash of the drug wearing off. It was the biological crash of a human body that hasn't slept in a week, realizing it wasn't being propped up anymore. It hit me like a sledgehammer to the frontal lobe. My vision swam. My limbs felt like they were made of wet sand. A headache bloomed behind my eyes, a pulsing red agony that threatened to split my skull. Do not sleep. I grabbed the shard of vinyl I had torn from the mattress. I gripped the sharp edge. I sliced a line into my forearm. The pain was sharp, hot, and grounding. It cut through the fog. "Awake," I whispered. "Stay awake." I crawled to the glass wall. I needed to see what happened when the Lucid wasn't painting over the world. For the first hour, nothing changed. The white hallway was still white. The hum was still a hum. But then, around hour 2, the flicker started. It wasn't the lights, it was the reality itself. The pristine white walls of the hallway began to peel. It started at the edges of my vision. The sterile white paint seemed to flake away like dead skin, revealing something dark and rusted underneath. I rubbed my eyes. The dead pixels, the static spots, were gone. The drug hadn't been causing the hallucinations. The drug had been hiding the reality. I watched, horrified, as the Somnium Institute dissolved. The bright, futuristic LEDs overhead flickered and died, replaced by dim, caged bulbs that cast a sickly yellow glow. The white-tiled floor became cracked concrete, stained with dark, irregular puddles. The air, which had smelled of nothing, now carried a thick, heavy stench. Rot, copper, and wet fur. I looked at my own room. The white acoustic pads were gone. My cell was a dirty concrete box. The bed was a rusted iron frame bolted to a floor covered in grime. The glass wall was still there, but it was smeared with grease and handprints, thousands of handprints. I wasn't in a medical facility. I was in a dungeon. Clank. The sound of the outer door. I pressed myself against the dirty glass, peering down the dark corridor. Dr. Aris and Nurse Ilara were walking towards me, but they had changed. Without the Lucid filter, I saw them for what they were. They were still wearing the lab coats, but the coats were filthy, stained with old blood and yellow fluids. And their faces. They weren't wearing masks. They were wearing nothing. Their skin was loose, pale, and translucent. I could see the dark veins pulsing underneath. Their eyes were huge, lidless orbs that bulged from their sockets, wet and glistening in the yellow light. Their mouths were too small, just tight little sphincters of flesh. They weren't human,
Or if they were, they had evolved into something that lived in the dark. They stopped at room 406, the empty room next to Marcus's old cell. "Is the vessel ready?" Ilara's voice wasn't the sweet digitized tone. It was raspy, a wet clicking sound like stones grinding together. "Prepared," Aris croaked. Aris pulled a lever on the wall, not a keypad, a rusted industrial lever. The door to room 406 groaned open. They dragged something in. It wasn't a person. It was a large black sack. It was thrashing. They threw it on the bed. Ilara reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out a syringe. She pulled out a long, thin metal spike. It looked like an ice pick, but it glowed with a faint purple light. "Hold it down," Aris hissed. Ilara plunged the spike into the sack. A scream tore through the hallway. A human scream. A young man's voice. "Please, I just wanted the money. Please!" The scream was cut short by a wet crunch. I watched as the purple light from the spike pulsed. It traveled up the metal, into Ilara, and then into her. Her translucent skin flushed with color. She stood up straighter. She looked fed. "Strong resonance," she clicked. "This one has good nightmares." Aris laughed. It was a dry, wheezing sound. "Enough to bridge the gap. The collective is hungry." They turned and walked back out, leaving the sack motionless on the bed. As they passed my room, Aris stopped. He pressed his face against the glass. I held my breath. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of my filthy cell. His giant lidless eyes scanned the room. He looked right at me, but he didn't see me. "Quiet," Aris murmured. "The Lucid keeps them docile, keeps them in the white room." He tapped the glass with a long gray nail file. "Sleep tight, number 404. Ripen for us." He walked away. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall, sitting in the grime of the floor. The drug puts us in a virtual waiting room, a white, sterile lie where we feel safe, where we stay calm, where our brains churn out fear and exhaustion, and they harvest it. They harvest us. I looked at the door. The magnetic lock was gone. In this reality, it was just a heavy iron latch. But from the other side of the hallway, near the ceiling, I saw something else. A camera, but not a security camera. A monitor, a screen facing the hallway. And on that screen, I saw me. But not the me sitting in the dirt. The screen showed the Elias in clean paper scrubs pacing a padded cell, looking manic but contained. It was a loop, a pre-recorded loop of me pacing. They're not watching us anymore. They think we're on autopilot. I looked at the iron latch on my door. It was rusted, old, and from this side, from the reality side, I think I can pick it. I have the vinyl shard. I have the wire from the destroyed mattress. I'm getting out of this box.
The wire from the mattress spring was rusted stiff, but it was strong. I sat by the door of my cell, my real cell, the filthy concrete box that the Lucid drug had been hiding from me for a week. The heavy, high-tech magnetic lock I had feared was gone. In the true reality, it was just a simple iron slide bolt on the outside, secured by a padlock that had rusted through years ago. The gap between the door and the frame was wide. The hinges were loose. I straightened the wire. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the raw, jagged energy of pure survival. I slid the wire through the crack. I felt for the bolt. Scritch. It slipped. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Focus, Elias. You are not a rat. You are a burglar. I tried again. I hooked the loop of the wire around the knob of the slide bolt. I pulled. The rust groaned. It was a sound like grinding teeth. I froze. I waited for the heavy footsteps of Dr. Aris. I waited for the clicking hiss of Nurse Ilara. Silence. Just the distant, rhythmic dripping of water in the dark. I pulled again, harder. The wire dug into my palms, slicing the skin. Ga-clank. The bolt slid back. I pushed the door. It swung outward on screaming hinges. I stepped into the hallway. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the sterile antiseptic of the Somnium Institute. It was a thick, humid stench of mildew, old meat, and electrified copper. The air felt heavy, like breathing through a wet wool blanket.
The hallway stretched out in both directions, lit by the flickering yellow bulbs caged in wire mesh. The floor was slick with moisture. I looked back in my room. Inside, I saw the pile of yellow foam where I had faked my overdose. I saw the grim, rusted bed frame. But above the door, a small red light blinked. A camera. I pressed my back against the cold, slimy wall of the corridor. I was out. Now what? I moved left, toward the elevator, or where I thought the elevator was. The facility was a maze. The clean, straight lines of the White Room hallucination had masked a chaotic industrial labyrinth. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping dark fluids. Thick bundles of black cables snaked along the floor like dormant pythons. I passed room 403, David's room. The door was welded shut just like I had seen, but the weld wasn't clean steel. It was crude, bubbling slag, as if done in a hurry. I pressed my ear to the metal. Nothing. No breathing. No scratching. Just a cold silence that felt heavy enough to crush bone. I kept moving. My footsteps were loud on the wet concrete. Splish. Splish. I took off my shoes, cheap canvas sneakers provided at intake, and walked in my socks. The cold slime soaked through instantly, but I was silent. I reached a junction. To the left, a sign painted on the wall in peeling black letters, processing. To the right, observation. Observation. That's where the eyes were. The desk didn't just slide away. It was ripped from the floor bolts and thrown across the room with the casual ease of a child discarding a toy. I curled into a ball, exposing my back, shielding my vital organs. It was a pathetic, instinctual reaction. "There you are," Dr. Eris croaked. I looked up. From the floor, he looked like a titan of gray, wet meat. His lab coat hung in tatters, revealing a chest that didn't move with breath, but rather rippled with something squirming beneath the ribcage. His face, that smooth, lidless nightmare, was tilted down at me. The pupils of his bulbous eyes were horizontal, like a goat's, but dilated to encompass almost the entire yellow sphere. "You are awake," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "The flavor is sharp, spoiled." Nursey Laura stepped out from behind him. She was holding the purple-glowing spike. Her head twitched rapidly to the side like a bird tracking an insect. "He breached containment. He has seen the rough edges. We must compost him." "Wait," Eris rumbled. He reached down. His hand was cold and slick like gripping a raw fish. He grabbed my throat and lifted me.
I hung in the air, my toes dangling 6 inches off the floor. The smell of him, rotten kelp and copper, filled my nose, gagging me. "You have a strong mind, Elias," Eris said, bringing my face close to his. I could see the pores in his gray skin. They were oozing a clear oil. "Most subjects shatter when the lucid filter drops. Their hearts stop. But you are processing it." "Let me go," I choked out, clawing at his wrist. My fingernails scraped against his skin but found no purchase on the slime. "Go," Eris laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. "Go where? There is no outside anymore. You signed the contract. You belong to the Somnium Institute." He turned me, slamming my back against the bank of monitors. My head cracked against a screen, spiderwebbing the glass. "Look," Eris commanded. He pointed a long gray claw at the wall of screens. On the monitors, the loops were still playing, the calm, white rooms, the safe, sterile lies. "Do you know what sleep is, Elias?" Eris asked softly. "It is a wall, a biological firewall designed to keep the human mind from connecting to the greater signal. You dream to distract yourselves. You dream to hide from the truth of the universe." "You're killing people," I gasped. "We are evolving them," Eris roared, spit flying onto my face. It burned like acid. "We are removing the firewall. For 50 years we have been thinning the veil. The lucid keeps the body alive while we strip away the barrier of dreams. We are building a bridge, Elias, a bridge to the collective consciousness, a world where no one sleeps, where no one misses a second of existence." "It's a slaughterhouse," I spat. "It is a chrysalis." Ilara stepped forward, raising the spike. The purple light pulsed in rhythm with my frantic heartbeat. "He is resisting the integration. Let me harvest him. The collective is hungry." Eris looked at me. He seemed to consider it. Then he nodded. "Pity, you would have made a fine vessel." He pinned me against the console with one hand, exposing my chest. Ilara raised the spike. Time slowed down. I looked at the console beneath me. My hand was pressed against a keyboard. I looked at Ilara. She was focusing on my heart. She wasn't looking at my right hand, the hand holding the shard of vinyl and the rusted mattress wire. I didn't aim for her chest. I didn't aim for her arm. As she lunged, I swung my right arm up in a vicious arc. I drove the rusted wire straight into her massive, unblinking eye. Squelch! The sound was wet and horrific. A burst of black fluid erupted from her socket, spraying the monitors. Ilara shrieked. It was a sound that didn't belong on Earth. It was a high-frequency vibration that shattered the remaining glass screens in the room. She dropped the purple spike. She staggered back, clawing at the wire protruding from her face. Eris roared in surprise. His grip on my throat loosened for a fraction of a second. That was all I needed. I kicked off the console, driving my knees into Eris's stomach, or where his stomach should have been. It felt like kicking a bag of wet cement. He stumbled back. I fell to the floor, gasping for air. The purple spike was rolling on the linoleum, glowing. I scrambled for it. Eris recovered instantly. He lunged at me, jaws unhinging to reveal rows of needle-like translucent teeth. I grabbed the spike. It was warm. It vibrated in my hand like a living thing. I didn't try to stab him. He was too big, too fast. Instead, I spun around and jammed the glowing spike directly into the main server tower under the desk. Crack, zzz. The spike acted like a lightning rod. A massive arc of purple electricity exploded from the server. Sparks showered the room. The smell of melting plastic mixed with the rot stench. On the wall, the monitors flickered. The white rooms, the loops of calm, pacing subjects glitched. "No!" Eris screamed, shielding his eyes from the sparks. "The simulation! You'll kill them all!" The screens went black for a second. Then they rebooted. But the lucid overlay didn't come back. The live feed came on. On 20 different screens, I saw 20 different dungeon cells, filthy, rusted, dark. And I saw the subjects. They weren't pacing calmly anymore. Without the lucid simulation to soothe them, without the lie of the white walls, they were seeing reality for the first time in days. They were seeing the rot, the blood, the shadows, and they were seeing the things standing in their rooms with them. On screen 402, I saw Sarah. She was standing in the dark. A shadow person, one of the static figures, was holding her hand. She looked at it. She screamed. On screen 408, the woman doing yoga saw that she was lying in a puddle of black sludge. Simultaneously, through the thin walls of the facility, a chorus of screams erupted. It started as a low moan vibrating through the floor and rose into a deafening collective wail of absolute terror. "You fool!" Eris bellowed, backing away from the sparking console. "You've broken the seal. The fear, it's too much. You're feeding it all at once." The ground shook. Not a vibration, an earthquake. The facility groaned. The pipes overhead burst, showering us in freezing black water. "Containment breach," a mechanical voice announced. It was distorted, slowing down like a dying record. "System failure." Clank, clank, clank. The sound of heavy iron bolts retracting. The electronic locks on the cell doors were failing. Eris looked at the door of the observation room. He looked at me. For the first time, the shark eyes held fear. "They are awake," he whispered, and then the red emergency lights began to strobe.
The sound of 20 heavy iron doors unlocking simultaneously is louder than a gunshot. It is a concussive boom that shakes the dust from the ceiling pipes. Clank, thud. In the observation room, the monitors were rebooting in a cascade of blue screens and static. But I didn't need the screens to know what was happening. I could hear it. The screaming wasn't human anymore. It was a cacophony of absolute raw madness. It was the sound of minds snapping like dry twigs. Dr. Eris didn't attack me. He didn't even look at me. He looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights had died, replaced by the rotating emergency strobes. Red, black, red, black. "Too much," Eris whispered. His shark-like eyes were wide, trembling in their sockets. "The surge, it's too fast. The bridge isn't stable." Nurse Ilara was writhing on the floor, clawing at the rusted wire jutting from her eye socket. Black fluid pooled around her head, sizzling as it touched the sparking wires from the destroyed server. "It's here!" she shrieked, her voice bubbling through the gore. "It's coming through!" Eris turned and ran. He moved with a terrifying fluid speed, his gray lab-coated form blurring as he bolted out the door and down the hall away from the cell block, away from the subjects. I was alone with the dying nurse and the sparking console. I scrambled to my feet. My body was screaming in protest, muscles seizing, head pounding with a migraine that felt like a physical nail in my brain. I grabbed the purple spike from the server. It was hot to the touch, dead now, its light extinguished. It was just a sharp piece of metal, a weapon. I ran into the hallway. The scene was a nightmare bathed in strobe light red. The dungeon reality was fully exposed. The corridor was a tunnel of wet concrete and rusted pipes. The floor was slick with condensation and black sludge. And the doors were open. Figures were stumbling out of the cells. I saw the woman from room 408, the yoga practitioner. She was naked, covered in filth. She was clawing at the air, screaming at invisible things swarming around her head. I saw a man from 407. He was curled into a ball in the middle of the hallway, sobbing, bashing his forehead rhythmically against the concrete floor. Thud, thud, thud. They weren't fighting the guards. They were fighting their own minds. The sudden transition from the white room heaven to this hellscape had broken them. "Help!" a voice cried out. I turned. It was a young guy, maybe 20. He was clutching his arm. The walls are eating me." I grabbed him by the shoulders. "Listen to me. We have to move. We have to find the exit." He looked at me. His eyes were blown wide, pupils dilated to the point of blackness. "You," he whispered. He pointed at me.
"You're glowing." "What?" "You're bright," he said, mesmerized, "like a flare." I looked down at myself. I looked normal. But then I remembered the warning carved under the bed. If the Lucid is in your blood, they can see you. The fear, the collective terror of 20 people waking vacuum in hell, it was feeding something, and I was the one who had flipped the switch. Suddenly, a siren blared, a deep foghorn sound that vibrated the fillings in my teeth. "Warning! Biological containment breach. Sector B, Level 5 hazard." Sector B. That was down the hall, past the cells. The ground lurched. A violent tremor knocked me and the young guy to the floor. Down the corridor, past the screaming subjects, a massive set of double doors labeled Lab B, restricted, exploded outward. They didn't just open, they were torn off their hinges. One of the steel doors flew 20 feet through the air and embedded itself in the concrete wall with a deafening crunch. A cloud of freezing white vapor poured out of the broken doorway. And then the silence came. The screaming in the hallway stopped. The sobbing stopped. Every subject froze. We all felt it. A pressure change, a drop in temperature so severe that frost began to web across the wet floor, racing toward us like a living thing. Something had walked out of Lab B. The young guy I was holding started to whimper. "He's here, the king of the static." "Run," I whispered. "He's hungry," the guy said, tears freezing on his cheeks. I shoved him. "Run!" I took off running towards the elevator, the opposite direction of Lab B. Behind me, I heard a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a sound like 1,000 dry leaves skittering across pavement. Scritch, 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 but magnified, heavy. I risked a glance back. In the red strobe light, through the mist pouring from Lab B, I saw shapes. Not one monster, many. But they weren't the shadow people anymore. They had flesh now. They looked like the subjects. They were wearing tattered remnants of gray scrubs, but their limbs were broken, rearranged, arms too long dragging on the floor, heads twisted around 180 degrees. And in the center of them, towering over the mutated herd, was something massive, a conglomeration of limbs and static, shifting in and out of focus. It let out a scream, the same digital static scream I had heard in my dream. The other subjects in the hallway didn't run. They couldn't. They were paralyzed by the sheer psychic weight of the thing. I saw the massive entity reach out a hand made of black noise and wet meat, and grab the woman from room 408. She didn't scream. She just dissolved. 1 second she was there, the next she was a mist of red and gray that was sucked into the entity's chest. It was feeding. I didn't look back again. I sprinted. My lungs burned. The lucid energy was fading, replaced by the jagged, desperate adrenaline of prey. I reached the elevator bank. I smashed the button. Nothing. The power was cut. "Stairs," I gasped. "Stairs." I saw a green sign glowing faintly at the end of the hall. "Emergency stairwell." I ran for it. But standing in front of the stairwell door was a group of figures. Security guards. They were wearing the gas masks. They had assault rifles, and they weren't looking at the monster down the hall. They were looking at me. "Subject 404, one of them shouted, his voice amplified. "Halt!" "Get out of the way!" I screamed, waving the metal spike. "It's loose! It's killing everyone!" "Containment protocol," the guard said calmly. He raised his rifle. "No witnesses leave the lower levels." They opened fire.
I didn't dodge the bullets. You can't dodge bullets. I just got lucky. The guard's aim was thrown off by the tremor shaking the floor. The first burst of automatic fire chewed up the concrete wall inches from my head, spraying me with stinging dust and rock chips. I threw myself to the side, sliding on the slick black sludge covering the floor, and scrambled behind a heavy steel pillar, a structural support beam for the underground facility. Crack, crack, crack. Bullets hammered the other side of the pillar. The noise was deafening in the confined hallway.
It wasn't the cinematic pew-pew of movies. It was a physical assault on the eardrums, a sharp, concussive snapping that made my teeth ache. "Suppressing fire!" the lead guard shouted. His voice was muffled by the gas mask, but calm. Terrified calm. "Team 2, advance and liquidate!" They were going to kill me. Then they were going to kill the screaming subjects down the hall. Then they were going to seal the doors and pretend none of us ever existed. I curled into a ball behind the beam, clutching the metal spike. It was a useless weapon against assault rifles. "Please," I screamed, my voice cracking. "Look behind you, it's coming!" "Target is non-compliant," the guard said, stepping closer. I could hear his boots crunching on the debris. "Take the shot." I squeezed my eyes shut. Then the shooting stopped. It was replaced by a sound that made my blood freeze. A wet, sucking noise, like a boot being pulled out of deep mud. Then a gasp. What is the... Squelch! It was the sound of meat being separated from bone with impossible force. I opened my eyes. I peered around the edge of the pillar. The red strobe lights flickered, casting the scene in a disjointed stop-motion horror. The 3 guards were still there, but the one in the middle, the one who had been about to kill me, was rising into the air. He was being lifted by a hand, but the hand wasn't attached to a body. It was attached to a long, pale limb that stretched out of the darkness of the ceiling pipes like a spider leg. The limb was thick, ropey with muscle, and covered in sores. The guard kicked and thrashed. He fired his rifle blindly into the ceiling. Bang, bang, bang! Sparks showered down. Then the limb retracted. It jerked upward with violent speed. The guard slammed into the ceiling pipes. There was a sickening crunch, and his body went limp. The other 2 guards spun around, aiming their rifles up. "Contact! Up high! Contact!" They opened fire. The muzzle flashes lit up the hallway like lightning. And in those flashes, I saw it. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't static. It was biological. It was clinging to the ceiling, its limbs splayed out, gripping the pipes. It had been human once, maybe decades ago, but the Somnium Protocol, the years of enforced wakefulness, the constant bath of the Lucid compound, had changed it. Its skin was gray and stretched tight over an elongated skeleton. Its spine had lengthened, giving it a hunched, insectile posture. It had 4 arms, 2 human-sized, and 2 massive, elongated ones that ended in hook-like claws. But the face, it was upside down, looking at the guards. The jaw was unhinged, hanging loose against its chest. The eyes were gone, the sockets grown over with thick, translucent scarring. It didn't need eyes. It had rows of sensory pits along its nose like a shark. It was Subject 0, the patient from the long-term ward, the one who had bridged the gap and come back wrong. It screamed. It wasn't a vocal sound. It was the sound of a dial-up modem amplified through a meat grinder. The creature dropped. It landed on the second guard. It didn't bite him. It unfolded him. With surgical precision and terrifying speed, the claws hooked into the tactical vest and ripped the man open. The third guard turned to run. He looked right at me. "Open the door!" he screamed, his professional composure shattered. "Open the damn door!" He was running towards the emergency stairwell, my exit. The creature swiveled its head. It sniffed the air. It ignored the running guard. It looked at the pillar. It looked at me. If the Lucid is in your blood, they can see you. I was the beacon. I was the fresh meat. The guards were just obstacles. I was the meal. I didn't wait. I scrambled to my feet. The guard reached the stairwell door. He slammed into the crash bar. The door flew open. He made it 1 step inside before the creature moved. It didn't run. It flowed. It moved like mercury, closing the 30 feet between them in a split second. A long gray arm shot out, bypassing me completely, and grabbed the guard by the ankle just as he crossed the threshold. "No! No! No!" The guard clawed at the doorframe. His fingernails dug grooves into the steel. The creature pulled. The guard was yanked backward out of the stairwell, flying past me. He hit the floor with a bone-shattering thud. The creature pounced on him, distracted for a microsecond by the struggling prey. This was my only chance. I didn't look at the carnage. I didn't look at the spray of red that painted the walls. I sprinted for the open door. My socks slipped on the blood. I stumbled, caught myself on the frame, and threw myself into the stairwell. I slammed the heavy steel door shut behind me.
I spun the wheel lock. Clang! The door shook, a massive impact from the other side. Boom! The steel buckled inward. A dent the size of a fist appeared in the center of the metal. "Let me in!" a voice screamed from the other side. It was the guard. He was still alive. "Please, open it! It's eating my legs! Oh God, it's eating my legs!" I backed away, hands trembling. "I can't," I whispered. "I'm sorry." The screaming on the other side spiked to a fever pitch, then cut off abruptly with a wet gurgle. Silence. Then a sniffing sound, right at the crack of the door. Sniff. Sniff. Then a voice. Not the guards. A voice that sounded like grinding stones. "Elias." I turned and ran up the stairs. It was a concrete spiral wrapping around a central shaft. The air here was cold and smelled of damp earth. I took the steps 3 at a time. My legs were burning, my lungs screaming for oxygen. I reached the landing for sublevel 3, locked. Sublevel 2, locked. I had to get to the surface, ground level. I looked down the central shaft of the stairwell. The door at the bottom, the one I had just blocked, was groaning. The hinges were popping. Creak! Snap! The door was ripped off. It fell, clattering down onto the concrete floor below. A gray shape stepped into the shaft. It looked up. It didn't use the stairs. It leapt onto the railing. Its clawed hands gripped the steel banister. It began to climb. It climbed like a spider, hand over hand, vaulting up the center of the shaft. It was fast, terrifyingly fast. I scrambled up the stairs, pulling myself along the railing. "Come on," I gasped. "Come on!" I looked down. It was gaining. I could hear its breath, a rattling, wet wheeze. I could smell the rot rising up the shaft like heat. It was 2 floors down, 1 floor down. I reached the door marked ground level, exit. I hit the crash bar. It didn't move. Locked. I slammed my shoulder into it, solid steel. I looked through the small wire glass window. I saw the lobby, the white marble floor, the reception desk, freedom. But the door was maglocked. I looked down the shaft. The creature was directly below me. It was on the railing of the landing I had just passed. It stopped climbing. It looked up at me. Its jaw dropped open. The rows of translucent teeth glistened in the dim emergency light. It crouched, tensing its legs to jump. It was going to leap the final distance. I turned back to the door. I had the metal spike, the purple spike I had used to fry the server. It wasn't glowing anymore, but it was sharp. I jammed the tip of the spike into the gap between the doors, right where the magnetic lock was engaged. I threw my entire body weight against it. "Open! Open!" Below me, the creature screamed and launched itself into the air.
Physics is a cold, hard equation. Force equals mass times acceleration. Below me, a 300-pound nightmare of mutated bone and muscle was launching itself up the stairwell shaft with the force of a hydraulic piston. In front of me, a magnetic lock held the steel door to the lobby shut with 2,000 pounds of electromagnetic force. I had a metal spike and the leverage of desperation. I jammed the spike deeper into the crack. I threw my weight against it, screaming, feet slipping on the concrete landing. Crack! It wasn't the lock opening, it was the spike bending. The air in the shaft shifted. A pressure wave hit me from below. The creature was at the apex of its jump. I could hear the wet flap of its skin, the gnashing of those translucent teeth. "Open!" I slammed my shoulder into the door one last time. The power surge that had fried the server room must have weakened the grid. The maglock flickered, just for a millisecond. The door gave. It swung outward, heavy and reluctant. I fell forward, tumbling onto the polished white marble of the lobby floor. An instant later, a gray blur shot past the open doorway behind me. Subject Zero had miscalculated. It had aimed for where I was, not where I was going. It soared past the landing, its claws raking empty air, and slammed into the concrete ceiling of the stairwell shaft with a sickening, meaty thud. It shrieked, a sound of frustrated, alien rage that echoed down the spiral. I didn't wait to see if it fell. I kicked the stairwell door shut. It wouldn't lock, the maglock was dead, but it would buy me seconds. I scrambled to my feet. The lobby of the Somnium Institute was a tomb. The aggressive white lights were dead.
The space was illuminated only by the red strobe of the fire alarm and the pale moonlight filtering in through the massive glass front doors. The reception desk was empty. The computer monitors were dark. But I wasn't alone. "Target acquired," a voice boomed. I spun around. Blocking the paths of the glass doors were 4 figures, the containment team. They were heavily armored, looking more like soldiers than security guards. They wore black tactical gear, night vision goggles, and the ubiquitous gas masks. They stood in a phalanx, assault rifles raised, laser sights painting red dots on my chest. "Subject 404, the lead guard shouted. His voice was amplified, booming in the cavernous silence. "Get on the ground. Hands behind your head. This is your final warning." I froze. Behind me, the stairwell door rattled. A heavy weight slammed against it. Boom! "You don't understand," I yelled, pointing back at the door. "It's not just me. It's here." "On the ground," the guard roared. "Drop the weapon." I looked at the bent metal spike in my hand. It was useless against Kevlar. Boom! The stairwell door buckled outward. The hinges shrieked. A gray claw punched through the steel, tearing it like wet cardboard. The guards sought it. Their laser sights wavered. "Contact rear! Breach! Breach!" "Hold fire on the subject," the leader commanded. "Suppress the breach." They shifted their aim. This was it. The chaos. The variable. I didn't get on the ground. I ran. I sprinted to the right, diving behind the marble reception desk just as the stairwell door exploded off its hinges. The sound was deafening. It was like a bomb going off. Subject 0 burst into the lobby. In the open space, it was even terrifying. It uncoiled to its full height, nearly 9 feet tall. Its extra limbs twitched, testing the air. Its eyeless face scanned the room, the sensory pits flaring. The guards opened fire. Crack, 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 crack. The lobby lit up with muzzle flashes. Bullets hammered into the creature's gray flesh. Black fluid sprayed across the white walls. The creature didn't fall. It didn't even slow down. It moved with a terrifying fluid grace, dodging the fire by running on the walls. It leapt, clinging to the smooth drywall, and launched itself at the phalanx. "Reloading!" a guard screamed. It was too late. The creature landed in the middle of them. I didn't watch. I couldn't watch. I heard the screams. I heard the snapping of bones and the tearing of tactical gear. I crawled along the floor behind the desk. The marble was cold against my palms. I reached the end of the counter. The exit was 50 feet away. The massive glass doors. Beyond them, the parking lot, the night, the world. Between me and the doors was open ground. The screaming behind me stopped abruptly, replaced with wet tearing sounds. The creature was feeding. I took a breath. My lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. The Lucid crash was hitting me harder now. My vision was tunneling. My limbs felt heavy, like I was moving through deep water. Run. I stood up. I sprinted for the doors. My sneakers squeaked on the marble. The sound cut through the silence. Behind me, a low growl. I didn't look back. I pumped my arms. 40 feet, 30 feet. I heard the skittering, the claws on marble, click, 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 gaining, fast. 20 feet. The glass doors were closed, mag-locked. I raised the metal spike. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down to pry them open. I used my momentum. I turned my shoulder, gripped the spike with both hands like a spear, and drove it into the center of the glass pane as I collided with it. Smash! The reinforced glass shattered. It didn't break into shards. It crumbled into thousands of tiny safety cubes. I burst through the shower of glass, stumbling out onto the concrete of the parking lot. The air hit me. It was freezing. Real air. Not recycled, not scrubbed. It smelled of pine needles, wet asphalt, and car exhaust. It smelled like heaven. I tumbled onto the pavement, rolling to absorb the impact. I scraped my hands, my knees. I didn't care. I scrabbled up and kept running. I ran towards the fence line. There was a gate. It was open. The black armored van was gone. I expected the creature to follow. I expected to feel the claws in my back. I reached the tree line 50 yards out. I stopped. I couldn't breathe. I collapsed against a tree, gasping, my chest heaving. I looked back at the Somnium Institute. It was a gray monolith against the night sky. No lights. Just a dark tomb. The shattered front entrance was a gaping maw.
Standing in the debris of the glass doors was a silhouette. Subject 0. It was crouched on the threshold. It sniffed the air, but it didn't step onto the pavement. It reached a hand out, a long, gray, clawed hand. It touched the air outside the building. It recoiled, shaking its hand as if burned. It threw its head back and let out one final frustrated shriek that echoed off the surrounding hills. Then it turned and slinked back into the darkness of the lobby. It couldn't leave, or maybe it just wasn't done eating. I turned away. I stumbled into the woods. I walked for I don't know how long. The Lucid was gone. The adrenaline was gone. I was just a man who hadn't slept in a week. My legs gave out. I fell into a ditch by the side of a road. The mud was cold, soft. I rolled onto my back. I looked up at the stars. They were spinning. The trees were leaning over me. They looked like doctors. Clause 22, I whispered to the empty sky. Biological failure. My eyelids were heavy, heavier than the steel doors. Do not sleep. I tried to fight it, but the darkness wasn't scary anymore. It was warm. It was inviting. I saw headlights. A car was coming down the road. I tried to wave, but my arm wouldn't move. The car slowed. I heard a door open. Footsteps. Hey, buddy, you okay? A flashlight hit my face. I tried to speak. I tried to warn him. I tried to say, don't take me back there. But all that came out was a dry wheeze. Jesus, look at his eyes, the stranger said. Call 911. The darkness took me, and for the first time in 7 days, I slept.
I woke up screaming. It wasn't a buildup, it was an explosion of noise from my lungs, a reflex action of a body convinced it was being eaten alive. I sat bolt upright, thrashing, tangling my limbs in sheets. I struck out at the air, my fists looking for gray flesh, for claws, for the purple spike. Whoa, hey, easy. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders. Not claws, hands. Warm, human hands. Hold him down, he's ripping the IV. I was pinned back against the mattress. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the static from my vision. White walls, white ceiling, fluorescent lights. No! I shrieked. No, not the white room! I won't go back! Mr. Vance, listen to me. A face swam into view. It was a man. He had a beard. He had glasses. He looked tired. And he blinked. You are at St. Jude's Hospital, the man said, his voice calm, authoritative. You are safe. You are in the recovery ward. Do you understand me? I stopped struggling. My chest was heaving, the heart rate monitor beside me beeping like a frantic alarm clock. I looked around. There was a window, a real window. Outside, I saw a parking lot. I saw a tree swaying in the wind. I saw a pigeon sitting on the ledge. It was sunlight. Actual, yellow, unfiltered sunlight. I collapsed back onto the pillows. Tears streamed down my face. They felt hot and real. I made it. I got out. The doctor signaled to the nurses, who slowly released my arms. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and caution. You were found 3 days ago, the doctor said, checking a chart. A trucker found you in a ditch off Route 9. You were severe dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from extreme exhaustion. Your kidneys were shutting down. The Institute, I croaked. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of razor blades. Did you send the police? The Somnium Institute. It's in the valley. They're killing people. The doctor paused. He exchanged a look with the nurse. It was that he's psychotic look. Elias, the doctor said gently, the police investigated the area you described based on your ramblings when you were brought in. And there is no medical facility in that valley, just an old textile factory that's been abandoned since the 90s. They found you about 2 miles from there. No, I shook my head. No, that's impossible. It was a bunker, underground, sub-level 4. There were guards. There were monsters. Toxicology came back, the doctor interrupted softly. You had high levels of amphetamines and an unknown hallucinogen in your blood, a very potent cocktail. We suspect you've been experiencing a severe psychotic break induced by drug use and sleep deprivation. I stared at him. It was the perfect cover. The Lucid drug, the abandoned building. If the facility was underground, the police wouldn't find it unless they knew where to look, unless they knew about the hidden elevator behind the loading dock. "My arm," I said. "Check my arm. The track marks." The doctor nodded. "Yes, consistent with intravenous drug use. And the scars? I cut myself. I fought them." "Self-inflicted wounds are common in these episodes," he made a note. "We're going to keep you for another 48 hours for observation. Then we'll discuss a transfer to a psychiatric care facility." He patted my leg. "Rest, Elias. You're safe now. The nightmares can't hurt you here." He walked out. The nurses followed. I was alone. I lay there for an hour watching the pigeon on the windowsill. It was real. I knew it was real because it pooped on the glass and flew away. I needed to know. I looked at the bedside table. My personal effects were in a clear plastic bag. My wallet, my keys, and my phone. My heart hammered. I reached out, my hand trembling. I grabbed the phone. The screen was cracked, but it turned on. Battery? 14%. I logged in. The little loading circle spun. Balance? $14,012. I stopped breathing. There was a deposit, dated yesterday. Sender, SI Payroll LLC. Memo, contract fulfilled plus hazard bonus. It was real. The money was there. I felt a wave of nausea. They paid me. They actually paid me. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text message. Unknown number. I opened it. "Thank you for your participation, Elias. The data collected during the breach event was invaluable. Phase 4 is now complete. We have successfully mapped the threshold." I typed back, my fingers slipping on the cracked glass. "I told the police. They know." The response was immediate. "They know what we let them know. Enjoy the money. You earned it. But remember Clause 19. Clause 19. The Institute is not liable for any psychological trauma resulting from the bridging phase. A second text popped up. "And Elias, one last piece of advice. Don't look in the corners." I dropped the phone on the bed. The room suddenly felt cold. The sunlight coming through the window seemed to dim just a fraction. I looked at the corner of the hospital room, where the white walls met the ceiling. There was a spot. A dead pixel, a small, vibrating patch of black static. I rubbed my eyes. I looked again. It was still there, and it was getting bigger. It wasn't a hallucination. The doctor was wrong. The Lucid hadn't caused the monsters. The Lucid had just opened the door, and I hadn't closed it behind me. The static swirled. It looked like a hole in the reality of the hospital room, and from that hole I heard a sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I pressed the call button for the nurse. I pressed it over and over again. "Nurse!" I yelled. "Someone help!" The door opened. The doctor walked back in. "Elias?" asked he. "What's wrong? Is it the pain?" "Look!" I pointed at the corner. "It's starting again. The static." The doctor looked at the corner. He looked back at me. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a shark smile. "I don't see anything, Elias," he said. He stepped closer to the bed. I looked at his eyes. He wasn't blinking. His eyelids were pinned back, or maybe they were gone entirely. "You're tired, Elias," the doctor whispered. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "You've been awake for a long time. Why don't you close your eyes?" He reached out a hand. His fingers were too long. They had too many joints. "Go to sleep, Elias." I looked at the window. The pigeon was back, but it wasn't a pigeon. It was a chunk of gray meat with wings, tapping its beak against the glass. Tap, tap, tap.
I grabbed my phone. I'm typing this now. I'm posting this to Reddit because it's the only place that might believe me. The Somnium Institute isn't a building. It isn't a place you can escape from. It's a frequency, and once you tune in, you can never tune out. The doctor is standing over me now. He's holding a syringe. He says it's a sedative. He says it will help me rest. But I can see the label on the vial. It says, Lucid, Phase 5. I'm not going to sleep. I'm never going to sleep again.